McKinley, and we're burning daylight. Howdy there, daylight burners. Happy Wednesday. How the hell's it going? I was gonna go live earlier, but kind of a crazy night, and well, not real crazy, but kids were not wanting to shut the hell up, basically. So held off. So I decided not to go live, and I had a couple different topics I was going to cover, but I kind of went down a rabbit hole, and I'll just kind of show you where I went, I guess. It's I thought about a couple different conspiracy theories, but I hadn't done a whole lot of research into any of them, really. And I started doing some research into the whole birds aren't real deal, which is hilarious. We'll get into that. And then it kind of spiraled off from there. So that's what I got going for you today. It's just going to be a bunch of rambling, but interesting nonetheless. We're going to go full on tinfoil hat here. So buckle up. But before we do, got to tell you about my sponsor. You know how it goes. Loma Livestock, sale barn there in Loma, Colorado, owned and operated by my good buddy George Raptopoulos. They're located at 1369 12 and a half Road, and they're in Loma. And they got a sale going every Wednesday with cows and singles starting at 9 o'clock, followed by the feeders at 11. And they are NHTC certified. If you'd like to consign with them or you got any questions, give them a holler, 970-858-9988. Or you can check them out online at lomalivestock.com. Thanks, George. Thanks, Loma Livestock. So, anyway, to get into it, today was the New Hampshire primary election. Now, of course, there's haven't talked about it much, but there are three Republicans on the ballot. Donald Trump, obviously, and then Bill Weld and Joe Walsh. Neither of which stand any chance at all of. They might gain a couple, or they might get a couple thousand votes apiece in the primary, but they really, there's nothing there. On the Republican side, Democratic side still pretty wide open. The caucus in Iowa was a disaster. We're going to touch on that. And it was, it was very close between Bernie Sanders and Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Pete Butt Stuff is what we're going to call him. That's what Dave Smith from the Part of the Problem podcast has dubbed him, and I think it's the most accurate. So that's what we're going to go with, Mayor Pete Butt Stuff. And Mayor Pete ended up winning with, I think, 0.1% of the delegates is what he led with. And from what I understand, Bernie Sanders won the popular vote, which the left wing is all about, is the popular vote. I still don't know how these caucuses work in like a true caucus state. In Kansas, I think I went to the first presidential caucus that the state of Kansas held, and basically it was just a primary election, except there were stump speeches beforehand. And So I don't know how the caucus works in Iowa. I don't know how it works here in Nevada, but I'm getting ready to find out. Not this Saturday, but next, and that should be fun. But anyway, there was a whole bunch of shady shit that came out after the Iowa caucus, especially when you consider what all happened last go around with Bernie Sanders. As I guess for the Democratic Party, as pro democracy as they claim to be, they really rig it in favor of whoever they want, which both parties are guilty of, which really not much of a surprise. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party are private institutions, and they set up these primaries in order to, supposedly choose their candidate. But at the end of the day, they can make their rules however they want, and basically choose whoever they want to run for president. So, more often than not, they set it up to where it looks like they have, a democratic process behind it. But, and I've looked into this quite a bit just to make sure that I'm not being biased one way or the other. But the Democratic Party is far more blatant about how they choose who they want to be in office rather than the Republicans. It varies from state to state how they. So what happens is you go to your polling precinct and you cast your vote, or you run your caucus, however it works. And then you would assign delegates to the state convention of your party. And from there, the state convention decides how to distribute those delegates. And so each delegate has a vote for who they want to be the presidential candidate. And once you get to the national convention, then the vote is tallied, and most states have a binding sort of deal on how you're supposed to vote, and once again, it varies from state to state. So some states are winner take all, meaning whoever wins 50.1% of the vote will get all of the delegates. Some of them are proportional, so if you win 20% of the delegates, or 20.5%, then you get 21% of the delegates, and so on and so forth. So, and those are kind of the two main categories. They're either proportional, I guess there's three. There's proportional according to your congressional district, meaning whoever. Let's say Nevada. I think there's 6. I guess. I think there's 6 congressmen from the state of Nevada. So each congressional district would get a delegate, and however that district goes, that's how it votes. But I believe Nevada is a winner take all. But we'll just we'll use Nevada just as an example for the proportional according to congressional districts. So it's however your congressional district would vote. Say Nevada has 6 congressional districts or whatever, and you would they get each candidate gets 3 districts. So you would delegate or distribute your delegates accordingly. So 50% to, all your delegates for the 3 districts that won for one candidate would go that way, and they're obligated to vote that way. And then you have distributed proportional to the popular vote. So, if you win 75% of the vote, you get 75% of the delegates. And then there's the winner take all. So whoever 50% plus 1 vote takes all of them. And Iowa was a proportional one. But the big thing coming out of Iowa, it's the very first vote cast. And whoever, especially on the Democratic side, it's like 8 out of the last 11 elections, whoever won Iowa went on to be the party nominee. And from what I understand, after all the debacle, like I don't think they've still reported in 100% of the votes yet. And this is a week later. It was last Tuesday the vote was held. And from what I understand, Bernie Sanders won the popular vote and ended up losing to Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, by 2 delegates. So 2 different precincts ended up going for Mayor Pete as opposed to Bernie. And several of those precincts were decided by a coin flip. We're talking, one of the 2 major candidates for president. Some of the deciding votes being decided by coin flip, and you can't make this shit up. So, you got that. So going into New Hampshire, leading up to the Iowa caucus, all the polls showed that Bernie Sanders was making a run, and he was leading the polls. It ended up being a lot closer than they thought, apparently. Allegedly. Those of you on audio, that's in air quotes, obviously. But the big news of the night kind of gets buried was Joe Biden, who's been the front runner since the very beginning, ends up placing 4th, I believe, no, 5th, 4th or 5th, something like that. So it was Mayor Pete, Bernie, Elizabeth Warren. Yeah, so Biden placed 4th. Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, and then Amy Klobuchar, the sad-faced chick out of Minnesota, ended up placing, I think, 5th, and doing pretty well. Right around 10% of the vote. And but there wasn't any clear winner going into New Hampshire, and that's kind of what Iowa is known for, is to provide a little momentum going into the next couple of races. So you had Bernie Sanders, who clearly had the momentum, didn't quite pull off the victory in Iowa, even though he won the popular vote, which is, a big sticking point among the left wing nowadays, considering that Trump lost the popular vote in 2016, but carried the Electoral College by a pretty large margin. So you've got a hypocrisy going on there. You'll decry the electoral system when it's convenient. The Electoral College made Hillary Clinton lose, therefore it's evil. In this case, talked about it some, but I guess I should focus on it more. Bernie Sanders is not liked by the DNC at all. Like the mainstream Democrats do not like Bernie Sanders, and a lot of that has to do with him being an independent, even though he aligns himself with the Democrats almost 100% of the time. He is not officially a Democrat. He's an independent who caucuses or sits and votes with the Democrats. And that makes him a little bit of an outsider. That term, I'll use that term loosely because while he is outside kind of the elite parts of politics, the dude is very much an insider politico. Like that's the only real job he's ever had has been some sort of politics. Like he's started several businesses in his lifetime. They've all failed, and the only time he's ever made any sort of income was as an elected official. So he's very much a career politician. He just happens to be, he happens to kind of march to his own beat, if you will. So DNC does not like him. They screwed him out of the Democratic primary last go around in 2016. And they're very much trying to do the same thing with him. If you remember back to the episode I did with my buddy Rob, we talked about the debate. In particular, they tried to come at Bernie Sanders, who is well known as like a champion of minorities, champion of women's rights, whatever. And they try to come at him as like a in the closet sexist. Elizabeth Warren, whose campaign had been kind of tanking at that point, trying to gin up some support for her, accused him of being a sexist, saying that a woman could never be president. I don't buy it, just because that's not like Bernie. Bernie is he's kind of a left winger through and through. So whatever the cause of the day for the left wing people is going to be, that's what he's going to jump on. And he also has next to no spine. If somebody is going to come at him with any sort of allegations, more often than not, especially when it's coming from the left-wing Democratic media side of the aisle, which they all run together, he's going to cave to him. He got screwed over by Hillary Clinton the last go around, and he ended up endorsing Hillary Clinton, campaigning for much like Ted Cruz did with Trump. Trump basically sucked any will to live from all the Republican candidates that ran against him, and they all ended up endorsing him, much like Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, Trump accused his dad of being involved in the JFK assassination, and Cruz held out for a little bit, but in the long run, he endorsed Trump, and same thing with Bernie. He blatantly got screwed out of the nominations, but he still ended up endorsing Hillary Clinton, and it just kind of goes to show Bernie's true character. Well, like he talks a pretty big game, but at the end of the day, he's kind of a puss. So he's just going to go with the Democrats because, yeah, that's who he is. He's not much one for confrontation. But here we are in Iowa, which is kind of notorious for fucking up the election, basically. Ron Paul, back in 2008, ended up winning Iowa, but it didn't come out till a couple months later when it didn't really matter. You know, the momentum had already wore off, and you know, they initially announced Rick Santorum as the winner of the Iowa caucuses. So Santorum had all the momentum going into New Hampshire and South Carolina, when it was actually Ron Paul that won. And this whole Iowa thing just reeks of coincidence. So I guess to get you to where we're at now, I posted a while back about conspiracy theories because I love a good conspiracy, and I haven't had a lot of chance to research them until just right here recently. And Doug Weissman asked me about them because he had been going down some rabbit holes. And so I said, well, no, I've got something. I was trying to find the most popular one, but I couldn't find the post that I originally had made about it. So I went off the cuff, and I went with the birds aren't real conspiracy. Because I didn't know much about it. I'd seen it popping up every now and then, you know, when I'd go down my rabbit holes, but I never really paid much attention to it. So I did a full deep dive into the birds aren't real conspiracy. Turns out it's a big troll job. Hilarious one, by the way. Like if you have a chance, go check out birdsaren'treal.com. It's a hilarious website. And basically, it's just a satire site of most of your kind of more well-known conspiracy theories, and it's well done. It's legitimately funny, and I had a good time reading the whole deal. But long story short, it's satire. It's funny, but I thought about just reading the whole site for you, but I'm not going to do that. Even though I spent all the time reading into it, I figured you guys might be subject to the same thing. But then again, why waste your time when I already wasted mine? So, long story short, if you want to get a good laugh, go to the website. If not, you know, it's just take my word for it. It's pretty goddamn funny. But some of the stuff that they hit on was, so I guess the premise of the idea is that back in the 50s, there was a CIA conspiracy to spy on every single U.S. citizen. And the way they would do that was to track them from the air, and they wouldn't have to use as much resources. So the premise behind it is that they exterminated all the birds and replaced them with flying robots, or drones, which we barely have the technology for now. So in the 1950s, it didn't exist. And but they went out of their way to make it ludicrous. Like they're saying that each bird is equipped with like a 5-megapixel camera, which, you know, didn't exist until about 10 years ago. So I mean, they did a good job making satire of it and making it pretty obvious that if you actually read their stuff, that it was satire. I'll read a couple quotes for you here in a minute. Kind of show that. But anyway, I went down that rabbit hole and got trolled like everybody else who goes down that rabbit hole. But it was fun. Okay, so I'm going to read to you the first evidence that this was a troll job. And I guess since you guys have asked for it in the past, do a little beer review while I'm on here. I'm drinking a Lagunitas Lucky 13, a Mondo Large Red Ale is what it says. It's got a pin-up chick, and 13 in Roman numerals is XIII. It even says that XIII, but it's all spelled out. So I thought that was kind of funny. Pretty good beer. It's a red ale, kind of hoppy, so like a mix between a pale ale and a red ale is what it tastes like. It's got the kind of a darker taste of a red ale, but hoppiness of a IPA or a pale ale. But anyhow, pretty good beer. Lagunitas makes pretty good stuff from what I've tried, anyways. So, anyhow, if you see it, it's probably worth buying a 6-pack. I don't know if I'd buy much more than that, but it's a good sipping beer. Anyway, so this is from birdsaren'treal.com, chapter 2 on the history tab. I guess this isn't the first one that gave me the impression that it was satire, but is what really kind of sealed it. So it's talking about how it all began and how they involved the military-industrial complex to carry out this plan of eradicating all the birds from the United States. And so talks about how they went to Seattle, to where Boeing was headquartered. I think it's still, I don't know where Boeing's headquartered now, but it was in Seattle. And they recruited engineers from Boeing to carry out this project. And so I'll read from it now, but it says 23 men from within the Boeing engineering department traveled to Area 51 in the back of an old school bus that they purchased from a salvage yard in Mukilteo, Washington. They were seen by a few individuals bringing couches and rugs into the bus, and they were also heard discussing, and I quote, really cool playlists for the road trip. And this was in, it says 1957, so obviously there's not going to be playlists because there's not internet at the time. And, 1957, the only type of audio coming from your vehicle would be an AM radio. And unless you somehow rigged up your record player or radio to the battery in your vehicle. Anyway, so that was kind of the main first thing that told me this thing was a hoax. Anyway, I still recommend go reading it because it's funny as hell. But that kind of left me at a dead end, because when you're a couple paragraphs into researching this thing and you figure out that it's bullshit, which I had a pretty good feeling it was bullshit from the get-go. It just seemed like too ridiculous of conspiracy theory for it to be real. But it kind of leaves you from nowhere to go. But it they touched on a lot of stuff that that kind of parallels today. So part of the whole deal was that the government wanted to spy on you without you being able to see them or get away from them, and so therefore they would use birds, because you don't ever think of a bird. Bird lands near you. It might be a pest if it's making a bunch of noise, but whatever. You don't think of a bird. And this was kind of the same thing when you think about your cell phone. You have it on you all the time, and that thing is basically listening to you at all times, and it has been proven that the government keeps all that. They store it in these secret servers, and they can pull up all that data at any point in time. So anything that goes on the internet is just captured for all time. If you remember, Edward Snowden pretty well revealed that to us, and it was part of a program started by the Patriot Act, which is one of the biggest abuses of power by the federal government that has ever, outside like the income tax and the draft, one of the biggest abuses of power ever orchestrated by the federal government. It violates like your 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment rights. Your 4th Amendment right to be free from illegal or unreasonable search and seizure, meaning that like anything you say, text, email, take a picture of, record, whatever, that's saved forever, and the government has access to that. And that, and under the Patriot Act, not only do they have access to that, but they can use that without a warrant. And that violates your 5th Amendment right to not incriminate yourself under trial, because if the government has that, they can use that, whether you want them to or not. And I forget what this. Okay, so in the 6th Amendment is your right to due process. So you have the right to a speedy trial, a public trial, judged by an impartial jury, right to be notified of the nature and circumstances of the alleged crime, the right to confront witnesses who will testify against you, the right to find witnesses who will speak in favor of you, and the right to a lawyer. And the Patriot Act allows the government to detain you without charging you, so you're not notified of the nature and circumstances of your crime, and they allows them to detain you indefinitely without charging you. So, and it also deprives you of the right to a lawyer, an impartial jury, and a speedy and a public trial. So the Patriot Act, just on its face, violates the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments. And so if the government has everything that you've ever put on the internet, and they can use that against you under the Patriot Act, then yeah, you're fucked, basically. Or you can fight it in court, which means a mountain of legal fees, that you may or may not be reimbursed for. Most likely not. So even if you try to fight it, you're going to go bankrupt doing that. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff that they touch on in this "Birds Aren't Real" conspiracy that that pertain to modern day, but overall it's just a spoof on conspiracy theories in general, and it's very well done. So hats off to them for that. But leaving me with nowhere to go, I turned towards the current election, because you have an outsider candidate like Bernie Sanders, who, one of the two major parties in the U.S., which was advised against by our first president, George Washington. They foresaw this whole debacle of the two-party system coming, almost 300 years ago. But you got Bernie Sanders, who is hated by the Democratic establishment, and you've got this guy, Mayor Pete Booty Stuff, comes out of nowhere. He is the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, which, if off the top of my head, it's like the fifth or sixth, or it might be sixth or seventh, something like that, largest city in Indiana. Like, not even in the top 5 biggest cities in Indiana. He's a military guy. He's a naval intelligence officer, and other than that, we don't know much about it. He's a little gay dude, and he's pretty moderate, seems like, as far as the Democrats go. Compared to most of the country, still pretty far left wing. I'm going to look up how big South Bend, Indiana is. But anyway, he's kind of like an Obama, like kind of came out of nowhere. So the population of South Bend is 102,000 people. So that would be roughly the size of, well, probably a little bit smaller than Fort Collins, Colorado, or Reno, Nevada. Not a very big city. Significantly smaller than Denver, I believe. I think Denver is about 500,000 people now. I'll look that up real quick too. Denver is listed at 620,000 people, basically. Give or take about 30,000 people. But anyway, so call it 6 times the size of South Bend. And you look at John Hickenlooper, who was the former governor of Colorado, which has a population of about 3.5 to 4 million people. Michael Bennet, who is currently the senior senate. Yeah, I think he's senior senator from Colorado. So he's been in office for, I think, 6 years, and then Cory Gardner's been in office for 4 years, I believe. But anyway, both of those, Hickenlooper and Michael Bennet, also ran for president. Never got off the ground. They're both just as moderate, probably roughly the same political views as Mayor Pete. Hickenlooper was the first one to drop out of the Democratic race. Michael Bennett just did drop out. Granted, Mayor Pete's a lot more articulate and likable than either of those two, but given their qualifications, they're right about the same level. I'd say if not more qualified than Mayor Pete. Mayor Pete ends up winning Iowa, comes in second in New Hampshire. So the New Hampshire primary happened today. Bernie Sanders won that with like 26% of the vote, followed by Mayor Pete, followed by Amy Klobuchar. I still don't know how to say her name. Klobuchar, I think is how you say her name. I don't know what. I'm guessing it's like Swedish or something. Followed by Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden, who up until actual votes were cast was winning the polling numbers. Biden's basically done after New Hampshire. If he doesn't win South Carolina, he's out. South Carolina has a large black voting populace, African American. Mayor Pete does, and Amy Klobuchar do terrible with minority voters. And Joe Biden does pretty well, so he pretty well has to win South Carolina to carry any momentum into Super Tuesday. But for all intents and purposes, it looks like Joe Biden's done, which, if you followed the race at all, you've known that for a while. He's awful. He's basically just running on, hey, I was Biden's vice president and vote for me. That's basically what he's put out. But he can't even get an endorsement from Obama himself. So, no Biden. Anyway, the big winner of the two primaries, caucuses, has been Mayor Pete, and there's a lot of shady shit that has went on around him, especially during the Iowa caucuses. So, if you've been following it all, you know already, but Iowa was a disaster. Here we are a week out, and we still don't know who truly won. I guess it'll come out at some point, but it looked like Biden was going to win. Or no, it looked like Bernie was going to win, and then it looked like they tried to rig it for Biden, and he ended up not doing well at all, and Mayor Pete came out the winner. So I'm going to just do a quick Google Mayor Pete Iowa app. So they had this voting app in Iowa that was supposed to like relay to the state Democratic Party in real time how people were supposed to have voted, and it failed miserably, like just crashed, I guess, all the time. And the first like 7 articles are about how Mayor Pete did not pay for the Iowa app. So I'm going to read from the AP. This is just apnews.com. Democratic presidential candidate Mayor Pete Buttigieg's campaign funded the creation of the app that was used to tally votes during the Iowa caucus. AP's assessment says that is false. Buttigieg's campaign paid the company that created the app that failed during the Iowa caucus for different technology services. So they did pay the same company, but supposedly for different. The facts, social media posts are claiming that the Buttigieg's campaign either funded or created the app used. Mayor Pete's campaign paid Shadow Inc. It's just leads itself to conspiracy that the name of the company is called Shadow Inc. Mayor Pete paid him $42,500 in July for text messaging software. The software was not related to that developed for the Iowa caucus. In addition, the Buttigieg campaign did not help develop the app. A campaign spokesman confirmed on Tuesday. So they didn't even publish the name of the campaign spokesperson. Other candidates and Democratic parties, including Joe Biden, Kristen Gillibrand, and the Texas Democratic Party, have also contracted Shadow Inc. Shadow Inc. Jesus Christ, pick a better name. In the past for services similar to those purchased by... In a statement on Twitter, Shadow Inc. apologized for the delay in results and confirmed that it was contracted with the Iowa Democratic Party to build a caucus reporting mobile for local officials to use. I don't know what goes into building an app, but I would imagine that these campaigns in the Democratic Party paid a bunch of money to these people, and they maybe actually got what they paid for. I don't know what they actually paid for, but anyway, there's also rumors that Mayor Pete's husband was on the board or something like that, and anyway, there's a lot of rumors circulating around this Iowa disaster, and so I went into that, and of course that spawned a whole bunch of other conspiracy theories, especially on the far left, that Mayor Pete is a CIA agent, basically a plant, and there's been a whole bunch of articles wrote about him, but they didn't do a whole lot to clear up the argument that he was a CIA guy. So if you look at Mayor Pete's Wikipedia page, he is 38 years old, Democrat, born and raised in South Bend, Indiana, which I don't know a whole lot about Indiana. I know the Colts, and I know Purdue, I know the Hoosiers, and I know Notre Dame. I know the sports teams from Indiana. That's about it. Pacers would be the other one, but so South Bend is where Notre Dame is, which, if you're a college football fan, you probably hate Notre Dame for pretty good reason. They were good back in the day. They haven't been an elite program for a long time, but they still get a lot of attention. Mayor Pete also served in the U.S. Navy as an intelligence officer, and that's where we're going to focus, is the intelligence part of of his service. So he served from 2009 to 2017. He's 38. So 2009 would have been when I was getting out of college. I'd have been 24 years old. He's 4 years older than me. So he'd have been 28 years old going into the Navy, which is pretty old to be joining the military. That in itself, I guess, doesn't raise any flags. Something to note that there's not a lot of people that go into the military at 28 years old. So I won't hold that against him per se. That's just something kind of that stood out for me is, typically you're going to go in at 18 or maybe like 21, 22. 28's a little old to be joining the military. He deployed to Afghanistan, and I looked into his service, like what he did, especially in the Navy. I guess there's probably a bunch of Navy ships. Afghanistan, I believe, is on the coast, or at least pretty close to it. Afghanistan is landlocked. So for a Navy officer, and he was an officer, he eventually achieved the rank of lieutenant. But for a naval officer to go into a landlocked country is a little strange. But he was also naval intelligence. Like I said, that's what we're going to focus on, especially considering the last 4 years where Donald Trump has been in office. Much of, if not all of the blowback on the Trump presidency has been from intelligence sources, so CIA, NSA, DIA, any of those other alphabet soup organizations. They've been out to get Trump since day one, and you got this guy who's naval intelligence, meaning that he probably worked with I don't know about the NSA. NSA deals with more domestic stuff. CIA is overseas. But Afghanistan being a landlocked country, it seemed a little bit counterintuitive to have naval intelligence there, considering Afghanistan probably doesn't have a navy. Just a wild guess. And not even really close to the ocean or a gulf or a sea or whatever. Looking at a map, Afghanistan is sandwiched between Turkmenistan, Iran, Pakistan, and Tajikistan, and just a little bit of Uzbekistan. But anyways, I would guess, looking at the map, they're probably a good 500 miles. And this is just me as a guess. I would say they're probably about 500 miles from any major body of water outside of rivers or lakes. So a naval officer in Afghanistan, even if you had ships close to where to the nearest ocean or gulf or sea or harbor to Afghanistan, you're probably at least 500 miles away, probably outside of range from your big naval guns. So the fact that he was in Afghanistan rather than Iraq during this time, like Iraq has coastline. There's been a blockade of Iraq for a long time. No, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that he was in Afghanistan as a naval personnel. So there's a lot of questions about this Pete Buttigieg guy. But he is all of a sudden, especially with Biden finishing 4th and 5th, respectively, in the Iowa and New Hampshire primaries, basically looking like he's kind of out of the race. This Mayor Pete has become the favorite of the Democratic establishment, and man, there's a lot of stuff there. One part that I read about him, supposedly trying to disprove the rumors that he is a CIA plant, was the fact that he spent some time in Somalia, and this article calls it Somaliland. I don't know what the official name of the country is. I don't know if they have an official government at the moment. From what I understand about Somalia, it's basically run by warlords. And but they call it Somaliland for some reason. And maybe that's the official name of it. I don't know. But anyway, he took a trip to Somalia because supposedly he had a friend that was living in Ethiopia for some reason. And apparently this conspiracy theory has been floated by white supremacist blogs. That white supremacist blog is called vdare.com. NSA, if you're watching me, the only reason I'm doing this is because it was linked in an article. So Mayor Pete and somebody else wrote this article. So they went to Somalia as American tourists, which they in the previous article they try to act like that was just a kind of a normal thing. I don't know anybody, the military or otherwise, that has been to Somalia. I know Somalia is not a very hot tourist destination. I can tell you that for a certain. Mexico, yeah, I could see that. Anywhere in the Caribbean, absolutely. The French Riviera, yeah, could see that. Somalia is not very high on the list of tourist destinations for U.S. citizens. But the reasoning behind it was because he had a friend living in Ethiopia, which is a neighboring country. And Yeah, so there's a quote from his friend here that says, "We hate to break the news to Twitter, but no, Pete was not in the CIA," said Chris Meager, the Buttigieg campaign's national press secretary. As for the Somaliland trip, it was not related to his work anywhere. Pete visited a friend while his friend was living in Ethiopia, and the two visited as curious tourists. And that says that conspiracy theory, as all seem to do, has been floated by white supremacist blogs as well as critics who note that Myers is now a senior transition advisor to USAID's Office of Transition Initiatives, which the Pete is CIA advocates eagerly point out has a long history of meddling in domestic foreign affairs. Go up a couple paragraphs. It says Buttigieg's Somalia trip, which prompted a letter penned by Pete and longtime friend Nathaniel Myers calling for the international recognition of Somaliland as a sovereign state, has a benign explanation. Okay, so why an intelligence agent with presidential aspirations would draw attention to their work by writing about it in the New York Times remains an open question. And they put in parentheses, is it really that bizarre to imagine a person who taught himself Norwegian to read the untranslated works of Erland Loe would make a pit stop in Somalia midway through a larger vacation? Does Pete Buttigieg really seem like the Myrtle Beach type? Alright, so I lived in Kansas for 6 years. I lived on the border of Kansas for basically my entire life. And I would consider Kansas to be pretty similar to Indiana. It's a Midwest state. I think I've got a pretty good idea of the people that live in the Midwest. And I've yet to meet anybody who has taught himself Norwegian or visit Somalia. So yeah, it's really weird that somebody taught themselves Norwegian, especially being from the Midwest. It's even weirder that somebody made a pit stop in Somalia. Does that mean that he's CIA? No, not at all. But doesn't make it any less weird. And maybe you people that are more in the Midwest can tell me where I'm wrong there. But yeah, I don't know anybody who taught themselves Norwegian, and I also don't know anybody, to my knowledge, that has been to Somalia. I don't know them personally, but I've seen many Somalians in Kansas, but I don't know of any American who has been to Somalia. And I've known a lot of military folks. Maybe some of them have unclassified missions or whatever, but to my knowledge, I don't know of anybody who's ever been to Somalia. And I feel like I know the Midwest pretty well, and so that they really don't make a very good case that Mayor Pete is not CIA. And while he doesn't have any official connection with CIA, CIA's agents are not known to be very open about their affiliation with the agency. So, man, there's a lot there with Mayor Pete, and it looks like he's going to be the front runner. So, I guess I would say look up on him, because if he's got the backing of the DNC, he's probably going to win. The way it looks like right now, he's polling well. People are voting for him, and he's got a clean image, and it's almost too clean, kind of like John McCain or Mitt Romney, Hillary Clinton. If you don't dig too deep on Hillary Clinton, obviously, I'd say ask Jeffrey Epstein, but yeah, you can't do that anymore. Sure, it was not your fault, Hill Dog, but all these candidates that seem too clean to be true, a lot of times they are. And just after, like a quick, I spent maybe 30 minutes on Mayor Pete. He looks sketchy as hell. I couldn't tell you if there's any truth to him being CIA, and he actually may not be, but there's so many intelligence agencies within our government that we probably don't know about, and you may never know what Mayor Pete's affiliations were, but it seems really strange, especially when you look at the areas he went to. Afghanistan, obviously a war zone, so that doesn't ring any particular bells until you look at what he is and what he does, and you look at, naval intelligence officer in Afghanistan, which has absolutely no coastline at all. He was in Ethiopia, who was visiting a friend in Ethiopia and happened to visit Somalia, which both have major coastlines that we are, I would say, I guess, involved in. Yeah, there's probably something there that we won't know till way down the line, because that's how that usually works. And then you look at the people that have been against Trump since the get-go. It's all intelligence people, from the Mueller report to, I guess, the Mueller investigation to this whole impeachment deal. It's all been intelligence people, and to say that Mayor Pete is not somehow connected to that, I think is naive. He may not be the boogeyman that they're making him out to be, but I still think there's something there. And then when you look at how Iowa went down, and how Bernie's getting screwed, and Mayor Pete is right in the middle of all of this. Whether it's just me being a little too conspiracy minded and reading into it, or if there's something there, I don't know. But I think you're going to hear a lot about Mayor Pete in the coming weeks. He basically won Iowa, allegedly, and came in second in New Hampshire. We'll see how he does. The next primary will be Nevada, and I will be at that caucus. We'll see how that goes. I plan on casting a vote for Tulsi Gabbard. That's another one that just seems kind of weird when you look at the state of the Democratic Party now, and you look at these two candidates. Tulsi Gabbard is a woman of color. I hate that term of color because it just lumps anybody who's not white into the same category. So Asians, blacks, Mexicans, whoever. It puts them all in the same category, and the only thing they have in common is that their skin is not white. But anyway, she is Polynesian or Pacific Islander or whatever. I don't know what the acceptable term is now. A woman, progressive, veteran, and then you have a white dude, veteran, non-woman, non-color, no major political experience. I mean, he's a mayor of a town of 100,000. Tulsi Gabbard is a congresswoman of a district of, I forget, it's what, 200,000, I believe, something like that. And she served in the military for 17 years, served as a congresswoman for 8. Plenty of good experience, and you don't hear anything about her. But Mayor Pete somehow is winning. So I don't know. It's like I said, this has been a pretty deep dive down a rabbit hole, but there's probably something there, and it may not come out till way later. But on somebody like that who seems too squeaky clean to be real, it's probably the case that he's propped up by, you know, the powers that be, I guess. So anyway, you're going to hear a lot about him in the coming weeks because he's done very well in the first 2 elections, and even though this is basically Bernie Sanders' race to lose, he's seems to be doing everything he can to actually lose it. So be prepared to hear Pete Buttigieg a lot, and do your research on him. It doesn't take much to find all this stuff, and all the articles that I researched this evening were articles trying to disprove all these conspiracy theories, but all they did was bring up bigger questions. And once again, that could be me just reading way too far into stuff, but no, I think there's something there. So keep an eye out, and when it comes down to it, and you gun to your head, and you have to vote between Bernie or Mayor Pete, I'd say vote Bernie all day long, every day. He's not a good candidate. I don't agree with most of what he says, almost 100% of what he says. But I think Bernie's pretty honest. I don't believe anything that Mayor Pete says for a second. So I don't know. There's a little bit of a deep dive into conspiracy theories. We'll do some more in the near future, and we'll do some more live streams. We've got one coming Thursday with R.W. Hampton, and I'm going to try to do some more of the live stream stuff. It seemed like we had not a lot of viewers, live viewers, but we got a lot of views on it, so we're going to keep doing that, and it was a lot of fun, so we'll keep doing that. Tune in Thursday, 7:30 p.m. Pacific, so that'd be 10:30 Eastern. Sorry for all you Eastern folks. Probably can't do it any earlier than that. But should be a cool episode. R.W. Hampton, if you don't know him, he's a cowboy singer, songwriter, and sounds like he's got some really cool stories, and that's what we're going to do is just swap some cowboy stories. He's a Texas, New Mexico cowboy, and it's going to be fun. So check that out. It'll be live on the Burning Daylight page on Thursday at 7:30 Pacific. Other than that, go check me out on social media. I'm Matt McKinley on Facebook, at MickerMac85 on Twitter and Instagram. Those are my personal accounts. Go follow the show page. That's where most of almost all the content happens is on the Burning Daylight page. So Burning Daylight on Facebook and YouTube, and at Move Your Ass on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Also go check out the webpage, burning-daylight.com. We're working on making that the biggest time kill for the working cowboy there is. So go check that out. We'll have some more content coming soon towards you, and make sure you tune in on Thursday for RW Hampton. So on that note, I'm going to wrap this up and get to bed, but it's been fun. Thanks for tuning in, and check it out on Thursday. And on that note, I'm going to bed. So move your ass. We're Burning Daylight.